This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. So you can already see I'm playing with my tech a little bit. So we wrote a lot more today than we normally do. But today we are going to attempt to draw a parallel between modern day cybersecurity and Benedict Arnold. It's July 4th, after all, the American Revolution.
That's right. We've got a lot to celebrate, but a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm. So, but my traditional, welcome Steve Maresca and Michael Grandy.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks as always for being good sports as we work through one of these types of episodes because they're not easy. But really, how can the most infamous traitor in American history teach us some valuable lessons about insider threats? And I think that's going to be our parallel. And I'm going to do something uncharacteristic, actually, and read a little bit more verbatim something that we've written because I put together a brief history of Benedict Arnold in case you weren't familiar with it. So I'll try to manage this as best I can. He was born in 1741 in Connecticut, and he grew up to be a successful merchant and militia leader. He joined the American Revolution in 1775, and he distinguished himself as a brave and skilled commander in several battles, such as the capture of Fort Ticonderoga, the invasion of Quebec, the Battle of Saratoga, and the defense of Rhode Island. He was wounded several times in combat. He earned the respect and admiration of his peers, including George Washington, who considered him a close friend and a trusted advisor. Probably an important point.
Mm-hmm.
However, things started to go downhill for Arnold in 1777 when he was passed over for promotion by Congress, despite his achievements on the battlefield. He felt he wasn't given the recognition and reward that he deserved. He became resentful of his rivals and critics who accused him of corruption and misconduct. He also faced financial difficulties in his business, probably important, suffered from the war and his lavish lifestyle. He married a young loyalist woman, Peggy Shippen, who had connections to the British spy network. She introduced him to John Andre, a British major who became Arnold's handler and co-conspirator. In 1780, Arnold was given command of West Point, a fort on the Hudson River that was vital for the American defense. Secretly agreed to hand over the fort to the British in exchange for money and a commission in the British Army. He provided Andre with detailed plans of the fort's defenses and arranged to meet him in person to finalize the deal. However, their plot ultimately was exposed when Andre was captured by American soldiers who found the incriminating documents on him. Arnold managed to escape to the British lines while Andre was hanged as a spy. Arnold then fought against the former countrymen, leading raids in Virginia and Connecticut. He died in London in 1801, reviled by both Americans and British who didn't trust or respect him.
That's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information.
Bit of history there. It's good for those of us who needed a little refresh.
Yeah, I don't think Benedict Arnold, we know he's a traitor, but that's probably the depth for most people.
We knew
right?
he was a traitor, and we knew he had Connecticut ties.
We're sorry.
Yeah, we are sorry. But at the same time, much more sort of deep history of his involvement. He played very key roles in so many things, and then ultimately becoming a traitor and selling secrets. And interesting, though, how we connect this to cybersecurity.
It's a direct parallel. You can see it directly works right to it.
It does.
It does. I mean, ultimately, he was trusted, right? He had prestige, he had authority, he had power and recognition. Those are traits that can be misused.
Sure.
Insider threats can be motivated by a bunch of different factors, right? So some of them can be greed, some can be revenge. It's very common that folks will simply just want to pay for their bills.
Especially a lavish lifestyle.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. These things can involve different methods, stealing, leaking, sabotaging, destroying data, you name it. Actually, we've seen a great many of those in true practice.
Yeah.
In the modern era, that might mean installing backdoors. That might mean ferreting data outside the bounds of the institution or the organization. Bottom line, there are lots of commonalities. Insider threats usually exhibit a variety of different signs. They tend to be acting suspiciously. They tend to be called out for poor behavior or performance. They're dissatisfied. They're complaining. They're disgruntled as a general psychological element.
Right.
So Benedict Arnold exhibited a lot of the commonalities here. I think it's a reasonable thing to assert.
Would you attribute some of that more to sort of negative culture?
Possibly. I mean, it's difficult to peer into the past, but certainly I think that he was sidelined, and that's the thing that affected from an ego perspective, and that's, I think, central to a lot of insider threats.
And even almost like some of the commanders and those above him, the generals that had sort of distracted interest, right? There was so much happening at this time, and yet even after he's passed over for the promotion
and demonstrated that he's competent,
that he's competent, he was still then given a very important assignment of control of a fort that had huge consequences.
There's another dynamic too in terms of prejudicial concerns. Like, he was born in Connecticut. In that era, if you weren't originally from elsewhere, you were considered somewhat of a lesser social status overall too. Okay. So there are lots of other things going on.
But in a way, that's actually particularly interesting because they turned a Native American, born in Connecticut, to the British side. So it wasn't like he came from Britain. And
that's right.
Yeah, precisely why I say it.
It's fascinating.
It's very interesting. Bottom line, though, he really did need to support some of the personal dynamics that caused him some grief, whether they were related to his finances or his lack of elevation in terms of skills and posture.
Are there things that can be done maybe much more in the cybersecurity context of today, to address some of these insider threats and try to root them out earlier, or, implement better programs?
So some of this is really preventative upfront. When someone's being hired, when they're being evaluated for their position, doing the right type of analysis of their personality, their skill set, their background. Background checks are, of course, a reasonable way of doing that today. Yeah. There are lots of other mechanisms like that. But bottom line, above all, after passing those filters, it's a leadership and development type of a consideration. The root of all insider threats, generally speaking, is dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
So is that the responsibility of the Sons of Liberty to have a better leadership and training program in place? Like, should they have recognized his dissatisfaction?
I think so. That doesn't mean that they would necessarily identify that this was a possible outcome, but I'm sure they could have intervened in a more positive way.
Probably not deploying the Myers-Briggs personality test early on in the interview process.
Oh boy.
Yeah, the background checks are a little more difficult then, for sure.
It's true.
Right?
Yeah.
But we've seen cases in this era of people stealing money because they had financial issues at home.
Yeah.
Sure.
And whether it's 1771 or 2024, those are real issues. And you have to monitor that. And if you put people in a position, potentially financial, like CFO or those types of roles,
sure,
they're targets for attackers,
right,
and there might be other motivations that make them susceptible.
But getting back to your statement about culture, it's really important to maintain a certain level of even-handed personnel supporting behavior. Mm-hmm. People do not become insider threats overnight. It's a gradual easing in.
Sure.
Most people, even good people, become this type of character at some juncture because of other pressures. Finding, early signs of dissatisfaction or actions taken passively or actively against an organization, those are the things that are worth looking out for. Inexplicable actions that seem to be against the business interest, that's the sort of thing we'd look for now.
And we spend a lot of time talking about different roles and who has access to what. I think we've, over several podcasts, talked about financial controls, mm-hmm, and who essentially has the approving authority and the check writing authority, right, and the wire making authority. But even outside of financial controls, access controls, internal controls within the organization have to be a key component of this.
Appropriate checks and balances.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Benedict Arnold was a perfect storm because he had the authority.
He had the keys.
Right. Yes, to see everything in that.
Yeah.
So he was one of the rare cases of insider threat that is abusing their delegated and actual power to do something malicious. In this regard, being able to access the fort's plans and secrets without oversight, that's within his job description.
Right.
That is, in fact, central to most insider threats, because you may establish role-based access controls, but if it's within the job functions of the person, detecting any sort of misdeed is very challenging.
Very challenging.
Right.
Yeah.
So setting aside, some of maybe the background checks, right? Setting aside the fact that he probably had more access to things than is appropriate for one person. Sure. If they could have recognized some of the traits, because it's not like he was turned overnight. Right. And you have to imagine he exhibited some suspicious behavior. But I think it speaks even to then of this sort of inherent trust that people have in each other. His peers, his colleagues probably recognized something and felt that there wasn't a significant risk, or felt that they wanted to set aside their concerns because they knew him as an individual and probably trusted him and liked him.
Yeah, blind trust is a problem. Subordinates should not blindly trust superiors.
Right.
If they see something that is untoward, they should indicate it through some mechanism.
You didn't want to say, see something, say something.
No. If there's something observed, they should report it through some established mechanism. If the mechanism doesn't exist, that's a problem. In a military function like this, subordinates are accustomed and expected to follow unflinchingly without questioning.
Exactly.
Establishing some dialogue bidirectionally across those lines of power in an organization helps to sidestep this type of problem.
Right. And we talked about with him and sort of distraction, and even though there were clear signs or warning signs, he was then given a new post, right, with all of this power and authority. The distraction thing sort of hits home to me, because in our daily life with our running businesses and being accountable to other stakeholders and our clients, we're distracted. We're just innately distracted, and we're not always paying attention to the things that may be very clear in retrospect. We look back and say, how did we miss that?
Right. It
was so clear this was the case. And it's implementing good controls to avoid that. Right. Seems like it's, as long as the foundation's built, as we've already talked about, it's another mitigating step.
Absolutely. Reviewing, auditing access logs to rooms with sensitive documents in this particular case.
Sure.
Access logs to databases, applications in our era. Those things tend to be mechanisms that support early detection. If they don't exist, you can't review. If you can't review, you can't find patterns of behavior. Right. But bookending with that would be, training for the overall organization at large.
Right.
Equipping people to identify suspicious activity. Meeting with a, British-aligned individual is probably something that would, cause alarm in a lot of cases.
Meeting with and marrying one.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a corporate world, we're not analyzing our employees' relationships.
This is true.
Right?
This is true.
But it's still appropriate to analyze, communications and interactions in a work-appropriate sort of sphere. And in this case, it might have been something you could sniff out.
So early security awareness training maybe would have helped?
It's still our position that training people is as important as any of the controls that you could put in, right? Maybe you call some of these technical controls, right? The wax seal that seals the envelope.
Sure, that's right.
That day and age was a technical control.
Benedict Arnold literally held the keys.
Yeah.
If the person holds the keys and you can bring in somebody else to authorize their action and things of that nature, then you're in better shape. Yeah. So otherwise, it's training.
So I'm lucky and also unlucky in that I don't even have, I think, domain admin control over my own workstation.
That's fortunate.
So when I need to download a new program, I have to raise my hand and ask for help and say, who can help here?
Right. And we trust you.
And apparently I'm trusted, but I think that's a good lesson. So no one essentially has access to everything.
Right.
And that's a smart move.
Yeah. The higher up you get, the less, frankly, you should be able to do.
Yeah.
And the more an individual should guide.
That's helpful words right there.
Mm-hmm. So the reason, one, we wanted a July 4th episode. It seemed like it was an appropriate way to have a segue into insider threat. And I think as we started to talk about it, the similarities were greater than we maybe even initially thought. And frankly, a lot of the things that we recommend to people today, to our clients today, they hold true. They would have held true then, and they would have potentially reduced the likelihood, if not maybe eliminated entirely, the likelihood that he did that. I find myself wondering if the Sons of Liberty had Vancord in their corner. Maybe we could have shortened the war by a year, saved a lot of lives.
Bold statement. Bold statement.
Right? Mm-hmm. But that's the kind of good that we're looking for.
This is true.
Right? We are
global defenders.
Global defenders in the world where good wins. So
that's right.
How appropriate would that have been?
Well, thankfully, the revolutionaries came out on top in 1776, and ultimately our declaration was, put in place, and now I don't want to do the math, but we're coming up, on major anniversaries again. I remember the bicentennial. I don't quite remember.
Yeah, right, but it was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
So we'll do a a tricentennial. What's the?
Or 250 years.
Yeah,
we'll have to figure
out the name. I honestly, this is kind of a fun way to talk about insider threats. We do talk about them with our clients. We do a lot of work with manufacturing in the CMMC space, and that is a specific element called out in CMMC. Right. And it's really difficult for people to set aside that human element and be objective when sort of evaluating, employee or personal behavior. And you really need to. And when we do the tabletops that you run regularly, insider threats always one of the more difficult because it tends to be less of a technology issue and much more of a people issue.
And very emotional, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are excruciatingly difficult scenarios to run through. And I would have a closing statement to say that everything from a technical and security controls basis is a backstop to HR in this discussion.
Right.
Sure.
So bidirectional collaboration across the organization, that's how you avoid Benedict Arnold's in today.
Avoid the Benedict Arnold. So as always, thanks for listening. We try to be a little creative, especially around the holiday period. We hope that this one hits home a bit. I think it actually teaches a valuable lesson while also letting us jump into history a tiny bit. Thanks to both of you for helping put this together.
Sure. Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.